Also, someone prominent like Nelson Mandela also said popularly that education is the most powerful weapon to change the world, and is more powerful, honestly, than war. You'd also find that, there's so many UN frameworks that supports the need for education. We have the Universal Declaration on Human Rights and the Convention on the Rights of the Child, who say that education is a right of the child, is a fundamental right of the child. So it's not a nice to have, but an actual right. And the reason I'm focusing on basic education is because in some societies, children do not transcend beyond basic education, which is usually free. So the idea is at least let them have the basic skills to learn to read and write and to calculate, so that if they transcend to senior secondary and university later on, or if they learn a trade or start a business or support their families, at least they have the fundamentals in life to work with. Now, I'm focusing on Nigeria, not just because I'm Nigerian, but because Nigeria has one of the highest numbers of out-of-school children in the world. I mean, the numbers speak for themselves, with over 11 million people, out of school. Other numbers that support this is that, you'd find that although primary education is officially free and compulsory, you'd find that about 10.5 million of the country's children aged between 5 and 14 are not in school. You'd also find other statistics about, primary schools, about the number of people receiving early childhood education. And then when you talk about women, especially in the North, or girls, especially in the North, you find that about 47% of, of women, or girls, females in the North, actually, attend school. So that's really something that we can really definitely look at. So I've actually gone through, in my literature review, gone through a number of literature, especially when I've been interacting with literature, and you find that there are different issues that affect quality, even though there's a debate between what quality actually means, because there are different scholars, that have different perspectives on that, and also what access means as well. And then what I also found is that, especially in the Nigerian context, where teachers are seen as the main conductors of education, or custodians of education, is very key for us to invest in teachers' education. So that's why I'm looking at their professional development as well. So in developing my question, the main thing there is, how does teachers' professional development influence the quality of basic education in Nigeria? Now, as I found that, teachers' professional development is key, it was also critical for me to look at evaluating the current teachers' professional development practices. You find that in terms of the practices, there are different practices out there, especially when you look at the approaches to professional development. You find that in terms of approach, there are different kinds of trainings out there. So you have scenario-based training, consultation, coaching, lesson study, mentorship, and then, a popular one, which is the on-the-job, type. And it varies from country to country and whatnot. You'll also see that in terms of teachers' professional development training, it's looked at in two different methods. One in terms of classroom pedagogy. Pedagogy simply means the method of practice of teaching. And then in terms of area of the subject. And then something that was also key that shot out was in terms of the retention of trained teachers. So you find that a lot of investment goes into, training teachers and whatnot, but then what happens when they leave? Because then you're now back to square one. So there's a need to retain teachers, especially in societies, such as Nigeria, where, a lot of teachers are dealing with a lot of social issues, economic issues, and sometimes issues as fundamental as being paid and then being paid on time. So especially when you look at the government system, so that's also very key. So, following on that, in Nigeria, when you refer to basic education, they call it the Universal Basic Education System. And it really looks at between 0 to 15 years, of age, and there are three main government agencies that monitor. So they monitor at the federal, the state, and also at the local government levels. So when you look at the primary schools in a state, it's usually being monitored by the State Universal Basic Education Board, for example. And these are important to note because when I'm doing my field research, I'll also need to get the perspective from their angle as well. Then, in terms of the teacher's professional development, you find that it's really, centralized in terms of recognition. We have the National Teachers Institute, and they provide trainings that most teachers should have. And then there's a certificate called the Nigerian Certificate on Education. And there's so many factors that affect and impact access to the quality of, education. I'm not going to go into all of them. I'm just going to focus on three main ones. Limited girl-child education. This is mostly prevalent in the north of Nigeria. Lack of access to information, communication technology, so ICT, that's very critical. And also the restricted epistemological belief of teachers. Now, epistemology, it really just refers to the theory of knowledge, in terms with regards to method, validity, and scope. And it's really important to understand what teachers' beliefs are on that, because that impacts their output as well. So putting all of those in context, this helped me develop my objectives and methodology. I will really be using a mixed method of data collection, and you see that vis-a-vis my objectives. So my first objective is really to analyze the concept of quality in relation to basic education and how it's received through, how it's achieved through policy and practice in Nigeria. Then I'm going to also look at analyzing the process and outcomes of teachers' professional development and how it's achieved through policies and practices in Nigeria. I'm going to be doing the number 1 and 2 mainly through further literature analysis. I've already done a comprehensive one, but you'd find that we always have to be engaging with literature. So I'm doing a further deep dive as well. Then I'm also going to assess key stakeholder perceptions on the quality of basic education. Remember I mentioned earlier that the whole definition of quality varies and it differs. So really I want to understand the perceptions, especially from the teachers. So with this, I'll be doing in-depth interviews with teachers, surveys, and then focus group discussions as well. Then the fourth objective will be to identify recommendations for policies and practices to enhance teachers' professional development in Nigeria. So I'll be doing a literature analysis, further analysis on that, in-depth interviews, but with the in-depth interviews and the surveys, what I'll be doing is that I will be having a mixed number of stakeholders I'll be doing this with. So with the teachers, with the parents, and then also with the State Universal Basic Education Board I mentioned earlier, and then maybe some NGOs that work in the basic education space. The main idea here is to fill the gap, because in the literature review I've done so far, I found that improving professional development opportunities for teachers offers an underexplored opportunity to improve quality provision, because I really found limited information with regards to improving professional development of teachers. I've had to dig to find various studies, but I mean that really also helped to reinforce the need for me to look at that, especially in the Nigerian context. And in that, my areas of focus are going to focus, number 1, mainly on quality. So the number 1, 2, and 3 really looks at quality. So number 1 looks at teachers' preparation and practice. So how do they prepare for their lessons and in terms of their practices? So with this, I'm not going to reinvent the wheel when asking questions, because BOSS 2011 and 2014 had developed something called a PPK test. So that's a Pedagogy, Psychological, and Knowledge test. So what I'm going to do is adapt that test with regards to the teachers that I'll be working with. I'll also be looking at learning experience and their outcome, trainings and training opportunities. So the first 3, as I said earlier, to look at quality. Then another thing I'm going to look at is investment in education. So Now, it's been really difficult getting information on investment in education. So I found that being on the ground is very critical so that I can engage with key stakeholders that can provide this information via reports that they might have and conferences and whatnot. And also with regards to education policies, because some of the outcomes of the research, the findings might actually help in terms of impacting policies. So as I mentioned earlier, my next step now is really further literature analysis and review, because I really need to comb in and see more of the analysis, especially around quality, surveys, focus group discussions, and in-depth interviews. And in summary, this just gives you a snapshot of my journey so far. So really identifying what I want to look at and my passion, which is really in terms of making an impact in terms of quality education, and to be specific in Nigeria, which touches on the SEG 4. Then looking at some frameworks that support that and prove that children do have a right to basic education, especially at the primary level. And then seeing how, where I found that teacher professional development is key to accessing quality education, and that's part of the discovery I found. And then now exploring current practices of teachers' professional development, because that's very critical for me. And then I've now identified that there needs to possibly be some kind of reform around the education, especially with regards to teachers' professional development, and also further investment in teachers' education. But then I also need to understand the current investment that they have. So I'm digging further into information. And then, so my research direction looks at investment to improve teachers' professional development, and identifying that there's a gap in knowledge. And the gap in knowledge really is in terms of, helping to fill in some of that information with regards to improving professional development opportunities for teachers, because it's under explored. And then this has helped, this will ultimately help me. Okay. Thank you, and this will ultimately help me land the answer to my research question. So I'd like to engender you all to please join the movement so we can help save the world with education as one of the key pillars. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is there any question?